when we're looking at a hypertrophy cycle side by side with a strength cycle, what sort of lifts and movements might we see in one of those versus the other? Because I feel like that's a super common question. And again, like I was this person too, where it'd be like, hey, so this is all cool, but like I really love deadlifts. Like, can we like do like, hey, I know we're like doing all this, but like, can we also like, can I add in some deadlifts on the side? So like, with both training cycles, we see very intentionally chosen movements in those training. So can you kind of explain that difference between the two and why we see those?
Yeah, for sure. So in strength cycles, we tend to see movements that extend at multiple joints. And the deadlift is a great example of that, as would be like a standard back squat. Both these movements tend to have more of that systemic fatigue that I referred to before. And so when you do a deadlift, you are down in the start position. Your ankles are flexed, your knees are flexed, and your hips are flexed, right? So you have three different joints of your body that are going to need to act upon the load simultaneously. So your central nervous system is on like super high alert when you're doing those, which is great because the pursuit of strength is neuromuscularly driven. It's the skill that I mentioned before. And so your body has to coordinate all of these actions simultaneously, which makes the deadlift and the squat super effective movements for that purpose. For the exact same reason that those are great movements for strength is sort of why they're not optimal movements for hypertrophy. Because when you do a deadlift, if you ask a handful of people, what does the deadlift work? You're likely to get any of these answers. Quads, hamstrings, glutes, low back, traps, upper back. Anything else? Did I miss any? Maybe those five. But like
your core,
midline. Yeah, midline. Yeah. That's a sexy one. So so yeah, I mean you're literally liable to get any of those responses. And the truth is that it works all of those areas.
Yeah. And it depends on how you move it too, like your technique.
Yeah, totally.
And sumo versus trap bar versus conventional, right. Like what way are you setting up on that?
Yeah, and I mean they all extend at three joints. Any of those movements, you're down in a squat, you stand up, it's extending all three of those joints simultaneously. So because of, like I was saying, because of the way that you have to coordinate that action in the body, it's extremely fatiguing. So they will produce hypertrophy. Like if you do deadlifts and squats in the 6 to 12 rep range, like you will get bigger and you will put muscle on.
I was going to say, that's how I got bigger doing that.
Yeah, for sure. There's no reason
8 to 10 reps.
Yeah, there's no reason you can't. Like people have been getting huge on back squats and deadlifts forever. I just think that at this point, we have the ability to select movements that are more specific. And when we talk about this idea of volume, the more you do being the driver of hypertrophy, like how many sets of deadlifts and back squats can you do before your ass is just wrecked?
Not that many. Like I think like when I was training, like I think maybe 3 sets of squats and then maybe 1 set of deadlifts, like a heavy set of deadlifts. That's it. And then you'd be smoked.
So if volume is the main driver of hypertrophy, which I'm not sold on, but there's this idea that it is, right? If the volume is the main driver of hypertrophy, then is 4 sets enough for like your lower body? I don't know. Like the way that I would look at it is when we look at hypertrophy, we can take this back squat that extends at 3 joints and we can make it extend. It still extends at 3 joints. There's nothing we can do about that. If you're going to squat down and stand up, you're going to extend at 3 joints. But we can elevate our heels, which will allow the knees to travel much more forward. And in the knees traveling forward, the compensation that the body does to account for the knees going further forward is that the torso kind of has to stay like a little bit more upright. So we're getting a little bit less involvement from the hips. And when we bend at the hips, as we do in like a typical back squat or deadlift, that is going to engage the low back and the glutes a whole ton. And so if our goal is to use the squat to train the quads, then we can do this kind of heels elevated squat, put the bar super high up on the back, let the knees go forward, keep the torso more vertical. And now we don't need to use nearly as much weight because the quads are just not as strong as the glutes are. And so when we do these heels elevated back squats, we're getting more stimulus to the quads and we're getting less systemic fatigue.
Yeah.
And so over the course of multiple sets, we can get a lot more out of that. And then the same example would be like an RDL instead of a deadlift. And so an RDL is actually a really cool version of a deadlift, a Romanian deadlift for those that don't know the acronym. But it's a really cool version of the deadlift because it actually only extends at 2 joints. When you do an RDL, you're extending at the hips and then you're breaking at the knees slightly, but there's no break at the ankle. So you're actually really only extending at 1.5 joints. I mean, you can't extend half a joint. So you say you're extending 2 joints. But in reality, the RDL is a much more isolated version to your glutes and your hamstrings than what you're going to get with the conventional sumo or trap bar deadlift. And so those types of modifications to movements can be ubiquitous across the entire selection of exercises. And then you can even expand further from what exercises I choose. And then you can kind of talk about the way that you perform the exercise that you choose. So there's kind of these 2 different avenues that you can approach your movement to get more stimulus to your muscles, but less total fatigue to your body.
Well, that's awesome because I mean, you're taking like a sniper approach, very specific, rather than like shotgunning. Like, hey, let's just do this big compound movement and see what happens, right? I mean, yes, strength has application for things, right? Like if you're a competitive strength athlete, but if you just wanted to build muscle with the least amount of fatigue, like this type of specificity is where you should look for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great analogy.
And so to kind of like recap all of what Bryan said, it's like basically when we're looking at strength, to get better at things, if we're going to look at the lifts, we typically see a lot of high bar or low bar back squats. We're going to see some sort of deadlift, whether that's conventional sumo, trap bar deadlift. We're going to see a lot of bench press and overhead press or strict press, whichever you want to call it. All of those, well, we have to practice those and we have to lift them heavy and heavier to get better at those. Because again, it's when we're chasing strength, it doesn't matter what we look like. It doesn't matter anything other than we're just trying to lift more weight. We're trying to get better at the ability to move heavy weight. And then reversely with hypertrophy, we start to see, modifications or we see substitutions on movements because we want to see, okay, what is a quad specific movement that I can target? Okay, what are, a hamstring or glute specific movements that I can do? And so, those modifications might look like, okay, well, in a strength cycle, I do a deadlift. In a hypertrophy cycle where I'm trying to build more muscle, I'm trying to improve my physique, well, we're going to choose something like an RDL. Or instead of, squatting, as Bryan said, we're going to elevate our heels so that we're targeting specifically the quads and stuff like that. And so it's like, that's so important to understand though, because again, it's like, it's fun to move heavyweight. It's really fun to smash a heavy deadlift or, it's like, that used to be my shit. Actually, it was like every time I would visit Bryan every like 3 months or so. And I would be like, okay, like last time I hit a triple at 255. So now I'm going to try to hit, insert the blank. Like that was huge for me. And so that's the thing with strength stuff is it's like, it's really fun to have performance goals. It's really fun to have goals that aren't just also oriented around, well, what do I weigh? How do I look? What is my body versus when you're also chasing, well, hey, celebrating what my body can do. And like that progress is so addicting, right? So it's like, it's good to have both of those throughout the year just because, you're going to get benefits also just in terms of, it's good to switch up your training on it's good to I want to say this carefully because I also don't want people to go, oh, just do, random training. But it's like we want to be changing up our training cycles and the things that we're focusing on also because, it's like we want all of that to work synergistically so we can just get the most out of our training and the most out of our time in the gym.